Hello, welcome to the TraxionGG podcast, where we talk about sim racing, esports, and racing video games. As ever, I'm Tom.
And I'm Tom.
Brilliant. And this is the plan. And today we're also going to be joined by the inimitable Romain Grosjean, which I'm really looking forward to listening to, Tom.
Inimitable. Last week you said something else. What was it? What was the word you used to him last week?
I don't know. I can't remember now.
What was it? It was an incredible... Lionized.
Oh, lionized, venerated.
Lionized,
yeah, something like this.
Inimitable. Yeah, I need a list of words to compete with you.
I've run out now anyway.
Okay. Well, it was a great podcast. Obviously, I did this one. You weren't available. It was Romain Grosjean. So Romain Grosjean, obviously known for F1, but obviously I introduced him as the founder of the R8G Esports team. And we basically just nerded out about sim racing. No spoilers, because you're about to listen to the episode, but the highlight for me of the episode was towards the end, where I asked him about the comparisons between testing a setup in a real car and testing sim racing hardware, which obviously he does for various brands, and like how those processes differ. And it was a fascinating answer about the depths that he can go into as a real world driver with these hardware companies. So great episode, but we will not delay it any longer. However, if you want to get involved in our conversations with our guests, make sure you join the TraxionGG Discord, where we'll be announcing our guests before we record, and we'll be getting your questions. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, etc., where we also announce the guests, and you can get involved and send in your questions.
Yeah, brilliant. And that really will help with future episodes and getting you involved in the show. And also, if you could help us out by leaving a nice little review.
Great review.
Yes, a fantastic,
the best, yeah.
Overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah.
On Apple Podcasts and Spotify, they're the two main platforms that allow reviews of audio podcasts. And on YouTube, a nice little comment and maybe some suggestions of future guests. If you're watching on there as well, that'd be fantastic. But for now, Romain Grosjean.
Hello, I'm joined by Romain Grosjean, founder of R8G Esports team and technical advisor to Motorsport games that we'll get into later. And I believe you've done some real racing too. I think it was 10 F1 podiums and something about IndyCar. Is that right?
Yeah, sometimes I do that for a living, and then for fun I come on and have sim racing. Or it should be the opposite. I don't know. Yes, I've been racing for 25 years now, and I've been in sim racing for 4 years. So it starts to be a cool experience.
Yeah. Okay. So I wasn't going to start with this, but how far back does your online racing go? So did you ever play any racing games as a kid?
Oh, yeah, I don't think you were born when I was playing racing games. I was stuck at a touring car that I used to play.
Great game.
Yeah, it was amazing. And Laguna Seca, that's how I discovered Laguna Seca through that game, and then absolutely wanted to go there. I think it was the PlayStation 1. And then I went to the Geneva show 1 year. I can't remember the year it was. I was on my own, so I must have been, 15, 16, something like that. And there was a contest. It must have been with Nissan, where you could play on Gran Turismo, and whoever had the fastest time would win the new PlayStation back in the days, and I actually won it. So yeah, that was fun. And then honestly, I stopped playing from 2010 to 2020. I didn't really play much, and then COVID happened and got a bit more time in my hands, and thought about joining back and getting involved.
Interesting. I imagine that 2010 to kind of 2020 time was kind of, quality of sim racing, not quite what it is now, but also you were doing a load of real racing. So the urge to play was maybe less.
Yeah, I think, in the 2007 to 2010, you needed a new PC like every 3 months, because the new game was too hard for your new PC. And then it got to a point where I was like, you know what, the steering wheel were not, the force feedback were not that great. And you always had problems, and you couldn't really get the mode you wanted. And the community was just not as good as it is now. So when I rejoined in 2020, I was actually amazed by, the step that was made forward. There are still things that I hate in sim racing. Honestly, yesterday I just went for fun, and I took the IMSA in Barcelona on one of the game, and I was spinning every other corner. So I'm like, I'm a professional race car driver. I should be able to do a lap. I'm not saying I'm going to be the fastest lap time, but come on. So there's still a few bits and pieces that sometimes annoys me, depending the cars. But yes, it's been great to join the community and get the chance to race people around the world.
Well, I mean, the world is your oyster right now. I mean, your racing calendar, I mean, your past racing calendar and your present racing calendar is every racer's dream, the series that you're racing in, the cars that you're racing in. But you're still spending quite a lot of time, or so it would seem from the outside, devoted to sim racing and your sim racing team. So what is it about sim racing that draws you to devote so much time to it?
Well, everything I do, I try to do it 100%. And I think I hate losing more than I love winning. I don't know, or maybe I love winning more than I hate losing. I don't know, one or the other. So when we started the team, I really wanted to create something that was going to be successful and going well. And we pushed the limits. We've been trying. I'm lucky that I've got guys running the team on the daily basis that I trust, and they're doing an amazing job. I think we've been incredible at finding new talents and bringing new drivers on the scene. And it's easy to go and pick up the big names and have a big check and say you're winning races, but I think we had a bit of a different philosophy where we wanted to go and find new talents. We wanted to go and find uh, guys that were the next generation and give them a chance, and that's what we've been doing very well. So R8G Esports is involved in most of the game, from Formula One esports to we did the V10 R League, we did Gran Turismo, we did Rensport, pretty much everywhere. We've been and doing well. So we keep pushing, we keep trying, and I think, yes, as I say, I'm lucky that the guys behind the scene are the one running the team.
Yeah, it feels from the outside like the R8G team is really close. There's a lot of sim racers take themselves quite seriously, but actually R8G seems like it's a lot of fun. Seems like there's a real culture behind it. Now, you famously said, well, famous in the sim racing world, famously said on a previous TraxionGG video that you give all of your sim racing drivers your number, and it feels like you take your role as a mentor in that team really, really seriously. Was that a conscious decision inspired by any of your own experiences as a driver in the past to take that mentoring role so seriously?
Yeah, I think it's key. Those guys, they passionate, they give the best, they spend hours practicing and trying to do the best they can for IEG Sports. We're very proud of them. We've been trying to support them as much as we can. We are lucky to have amazing talent up there. And yes, they can always text me, if they have a question, if they have a doubt, if they want to talk about anything or anyone. And I'm proud to have that relationship with them. Being the founder of the team, as I say, on the daily basis, I'm too busy to run it, but they always have access to me if they need to.
Yeah, now I'm curious about the cultural crossover between sim racing and real racing. There's some obvious differences. For example, the teams tend to be remote, so you're not all at the track, in the paddock, in the garage together. You're all separate, albeit perhaps in a Discord call. But I'm interested to know if there's any lessons from your career as a racing driver that particularly translate well to sim races. Is there anything in particular that you're quite passionate about teaching your young esports drivers?
I think there's actually quite a few. Honestly, the team is run as a professional team race. In the racing world will be run, obviously to a smaller extent, a little bit less people. As you say, it's mostly remote, but we try to meet a few times a year to build that relationship between all of us and know each other. It's good to know someone's voice. It's good to know someone on Zoom, but it's always better to meet someone. So we've been trying to get that. We've been trying to, put process in place from the manager, the communication side, the engineers, the driver, have report and briefing and debriefing, and just the way we would do in real life. I know there's things that we can translate, but I would say that there's a lot of it that we can use.
How about pressure? Now, pressure in real world motorsport. There's always people looking for your seat, and that you're always racing against the clock. And in sim racing, arguably, perhaps there's less on the line, but there's a vaster quantity of people who could take your place, because it's so much more accessible. You don't need to have millions of pounds to go sim racing, so the barrier to entry is far lower, and the deltas when you look at qualifying times in sim racing are absolutely tiny. How do you help your drivers cope with that pressure?
Yeah, it's tough. I see the musical chair from another point of view, not as a driver, so I don't feel that pressure in sim racing. Of course, I do it through my career, but yes, I think we've seen many good drivers, many talented drivers coming through. We've seen some that just can't cope with pressure. We've seen some that get better with pressure, and that's what we're looking for. I think every champion gets better when there's a lot of pressure. It's time that they deliver the best results, and we've seen that with some of the boys, and sadly we've also seen the opposite. So it's just part of the learning process. It's part of what we do as a team. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of drivers that can, even though sim racing is an expensive esports, game, because you need a simulator, you need a steering wheel, that force feedback and pedals and everything. So it's still an investment at the beginning. But yes, I think there's more there, and we always keep an eye on everyone. Just keep an eye on the top one coming through, and seeing who we can get into our roster. But if you look at the top championship, there hasn't been that much changes. The top guys are always the top guys, and of course we're trying to bring new ones, and we're lucky that we run for different teams and we run under different colors through esports. In Formula One esports, for example, we are there up there with Sauber and Haas F1 team, and then now in Rensport we're with Vitality Esports, which is such a big organization. It was very proud for us to have a collaboration with them on the Rensport games. So there's always young talents, but the top guys are up there and they're very good.
Now, I'm curious to know how you identify that talent. You've obviously been around a lot of real-world drivers, and I'm wondering, are there any experiences that you use when you're picking your esports roster? Are there certain qualities in an individual that you would look for in both a sim racer and a real-world driver that they would need to have for you to know that they've got that something special to keep going when it gets tough?
I think, you need to face those situations to really realize what the driver is capable of. And as I said, we've had a lot of good choices, but also some that didn't work. And I was kind of the first one to pinpoint that that driver could just not make it. And my guys were like, no, I think it's going to be all right. And there's one instance that I thought since day one, I just knew he wasn't going to be good enough. And my guys were telling me, no, but in practice and these and the lap time and those, and I say, yeah, but it's not going to work. And then I was right. So, but also I've seen other ones where it's get tough, and we tell them that no, it's time for you to do what you have to do. We need it for the championship, we need it for the team, we need it for this, that, and they just step up and they do their work. So that's also something that's very important.
How much have you enjoyed the process of managing rather than driving? Because obviously you don't drive for the R8G team in a competitive in a competitive sense, right? So have you enjoyed the process of kind of looking back at your career as a driver and trying to remember how you were managed and how you were mentored, and then applying those lessons to creating this team? That must have been quite fun as a project.
Yeah, 100%. I've used all the experience that I've went through, and the good team manager I had, and the less good ones, and tried to replicate what I liked from my career, and then also what didn't really work for me. Try not to do that again. But yes, absolutely, it's been a great experience, and I'm really enjoying it. I think we know competing against very top teams, and of course Max Verstappen with Red Bull. They brought a lot of budget. They brought a big squad up there, and we know that games we just can't fight against them just because of the lineup they have. But we're not giving up. We're still trying to find the next generation, trying to find a young talent, and we've done very well. So
yeah, no, absolutely. Now it strikes me as a bit of a trend at the moment that there's a lot of real world racing drivers who are starting to explore sim racing. some have already made moves. So Kevin Magnussen joined Asetek as an ambassador for their sim racing wheels and pedals and produced some videos on kind of feedback for their hardware. We had Mika Salo partnered with SimuCube to promote their hardware. Tony Kanaan actually had his own sim rig with Micro Center and then did an Asetek collaborative wheel. You've previously partnered with a sim racing hardware company, and now you work with Motorsport Games to help them develop their products. So you're very much one of these drivers that's kind of looking forward to sim racing. But I'm curious to know how these technical partnerships work in a practical sense. So, for example, if you could give us an insight into the process of sitting down and helping Motorsport Games make LMU feel good for gamers. I mean, there must be so many layers to that.
Yeah, I mean, from the first one, the sound. You jump in when I jump in the sim. If the sound is not right, I can tell them it's not what we hear. And there's only,
That's fascinating.
I mean, 6 guys that know what the SC63 Lamborghini sounds like from inside the cockpit.
Yeah. I did not think that would be the first thing you said.
Yeah, but it's the first thing that when you switch on the engine and how the cockpit looks, and then of course then later we go into the behavior of the car, which is the hardest part. But first of all, we want it to be you want to be in it as you were in it in real life. So you need to get those senses right: sounds, vision, cockpit position, colors of the the dash and the carbon and all of that. So you want to make it as realistic as you can in terms of feeling and models on track, but also as it looks.
If the Sim Racing Expo sounds like something you want to be at, or maybe you've already planned on going but just haven't bought your tickets yet, then I've got some good news for you. The Expo are offering a 5% Traction discount for those of you who want to buy tickets. Now all you have to do is head to the description down below and click on the affiliate link to find out more. There will also be a Traction article explaining how you can go about claiming this discount, so make sure you check that out as well if you're unsure, and simply follow the steps. The 2024 ADAC Sim Racing Expo takes place between the 18th and 20th of October in Dortmund, Germany. So make sure you get those dates down in your calendar, and hopefully we'll see you there.
Which is interesting because you just said there's only 6 people that know what it really sounds like. So, for the average gamer jumping into the game, that they don't know if that's right or wrong.
No.
They just have to trust. Well, if Roman says this is what it sounds like, then by God, I believe it. Now there must be a lot more. Yeah, but there must be a lot more layers to the feel of a car. Now, something that I've spoken about on this podcast before, which fascinates me, and I've never been able to ask a driver of your caliber how you see this relationship. But in the real world of driving, it's the driver, the car, and the track conditions, and then you have the setup of the car. Those are kind of your variables about how a car's going to perform and how it's going to feel. In sim racing, there's an additional layer, which is the hardware and firmware of your wheel and your pedals, right? So you could have the same car with the same setup in the same game, on the same track, with the same track conditions and the same driver, but one could be using, I don't know, say Fanatec, and the other could be using a Logitech or whatever. And actually, the experience could be very different. The driving ability might be easier or might be tougher. How have you kind of reconciled that in your head whilst you're giving very specific technical feedback to a game like LMU?
Yeah, I think that's where it gets tricky. I think most of the hardware nowadays are getting very competitive and very close. I'm not going to name most of the brands, but I personally use VRS at home for pedals and force feedback and steering wheel. So that's what I use. Of course, then you can always change a bit of the settings here and there. But before I was using a different brand and it didn't feel that different. So really, I think once you get up there with those direct drive, you get the most of it. And that's what I base myself on, because that's the most realistic we think we have in terms of sim racing to get a feedback. Of course, then if you take no disrespect to Logitech, but a G27, which was an amazing wheel that I had back in the days, it's not going to be quite the same. But that means also that you not necessarily as into it that if you had the proper direct drive to get the force feedback. I know it's expensive, and I touched base early on, and of course it's not a remote control that you can just plug and play. But we're also the only esports game that is as realistic as it is. If we take FIFA or PGA Tour, you play with a remote and you don't actually play football or golf. When you play Call of Duty or those games that are fun, you kill people. That's not really what you do in life. When you come on,
Yeah.
racing games and the simulation, that is what we do in life. That is, we set up the car, we try to race people, try to make good passes. So I know we don't have the biggest fan base at all esports, but if we think of which one is the only one that can be close to real life, it's what we do, and it's sim racing.
Yeah, no, totally. And which is why it makes so much sense that the hardware brands are turning to real world drivers for their feedback. Now, real world drivers clearly put a lot of time giving feedback to their engineers on how a car feels, and then how a setup feels, and how a setup in a car feels with respect to different tracks and different track conditions. How much of that discipline, art, craft, whatever you would call that, in a practical sense, do you apply when you're giving feedback on hardware, when you've done that for brands in the past? Like, how detailed can you go?
You can go pretty far, and I would say that 80% of all the setup work is realistic. There's still going to be a 20% there that's not quite accurate. It's like, if we take the racing line on track, most of the game of it's the kind of feels like it's layers. So you've got the layers with the highest grip that they consider being the racing line, 100% grip, and then the next layer is like 80, and then 70 and 60 and so on. It's not like that in real life. It changes to the races. Sometimes missing the apex by a meter may be faster than getting the apex, and so on and so forth. That's the only thing that I find right now that I'm not super happy with, as well as the tire model. The overheating of the tire is such a hard. I mean, if you take iRacing, not to name them, but you spin and then you spin the car back and you try to go forward, you just can't even go back forward. You just barely press the throttle.
We've all been there.
And you're like, dude, that's not the way it is. I promise you, that's not the way it is. and I think they, sometimes by trying to be as realistic as they can with thermal effect on tires, we mess up the game. And I'm going to tell you something. On the simulator for IndyCar, and most of the simulator that I run in Formula One, we never use thermal effect on tires because it's just too complicated. So we would keep it as simple as it gets. I know some F1 teams start to use it, but the amount of data and time they spend on it's insane. So it's almost like you want to get that thing a little bit more simple and just be able to fight the car a touch more rather than just always have to be within a certain slip angle to make it perfect.
It's almost like there's an element of randomness in the real world of racing that you can't possibly replicate in sim racing. And actually that separates good drivers from great drivers, is that they can read what's happening right then. That won't happen ever again, but they can read it quickly. Yeah,
absolutely. I remember one year I was talking to Scott Dixon, a huge champion in IndyCar, and I was watching one of the Laguna Seca race, and I was asking him the year after, but I said, why are you running wide everywhere? I said, dude, I had no idea, but the grip during the race became like the wet line, became like the racing line. It was so much faster. And in 2021, that happened again. And I was just running wide every single corner. I was not even trying to make an apex. And I was flying. And I remember the conversation, and no idea why. The whole weekend, the grip was on the apex, and then suddenly the race just moved. And, same thing on ovals. Sometimes the high line works really well, sometimes the low line, and you have to kind of go there and figure it out. So, it's not like it's always stepped in stone or written in stone that it's going to be the bottom line that works the best. Sometimes it's just different depending your car balance and what you feel.
And you could imagine the kickoff online if a game made that the case, that the racing line wasn't the racing line. They're like, well, guys, so this happens sometimes. I don't think people would accept it.
No, that's what I'm saying. Maybe sometimes keep things a little bit more simple rather than having one racing line, make it a little bit wider instead of having an extreme tire model with temperature, make it a little bit simpler. And I think the racing would be better, and it would be a little bit less very specific to some guys. But again, I'm very impressed with this the changes that have been made in the last 10 years, and it's a lot of fun. And they have so many cars nowadays you can drive, from GTPs or prototypes to GT3s to Formula One to Formula Nippon to Formula 4 to NASCAR. I mean, dirts, anything you want, you can play.
It's absolutely wild, and we've already touched on it about how far sim racing has come, especially kind of since leading up to and then since COVID, where the perfect storm of simulation getting that bit better, direct drive becoming that much more mainstream, and then COVID, and it was the perfect storm to kind of drive the growth of sim racing. But you might think then that everything from here on in is marginal gains, but I'm curious to hear from you what you're most excited about in the next few years in the world of sim racing. Like, where do you think the big gains could be made?
Well, it's how do we feel the rear end of the car? Because right now it's just very limited in how you can feel the rear end of the car through your butt instead of through your hands. Yeah, maybe, I don't know, but it's even in the big hardware sim racing, it's the hardest part to feel. So it's even the top simulator I've been struggling to get that. There's only one in my life that I drove, don't jump in a simulator, and I was like, this is insane. I can feel like it's a real car. Every other one, it just feel like it's a very advanced video games, but it's still a video game.
Well, it's still a lot of fun, and I guess there's a whole other discussion to be had about making racing games for drivers or for gamers to kind of have that immersive experience and the reality versus enjoyment. But I'm going to jump onto our audience questions because I know that you're short for time, and I really appreciate the time that you've given us. So, as you can imagine, I put out in the TraxionGG and Gridfinder Discords that you were coming on the show and for people to send questions, and we had a stupid amount of questions, and I feel terrible because there are dozens and dozens and dozens that we just haven't had time to cover. But I've chosen three. One is from Strovic, a big fan of the show, always sends in a question. He says, what advice do you have for sim racers looking to find sponsorship to make the jump to real world racing? He actually references in the question this kind of all too familiar story of a sim racer who sweeps up all the wins and podiums in Formula Renault America, but then is unable to continue. But I guess the question is generic.
Yeah, it's the greatest sadness of motorsport. It's the cost to start racing. I mean, and even in my time, it was expensive, but it was so much cheaper than it is right now. I'm amazed by the cost, and I don't really have any answers, honestly. It's being at the right place at the right time. I truly believe that we can have some sim racers coming in real life and doing a great job. When I see the data and I see how they brake and how they feel the car, I'm sure we can have guys that would do an amazingly good job in real life. How do we make that happen? I don't know. That's something I've been trying to do since 2020. We almost succeeded with one, and we tried, and it's just hard because it's difficult. But all I would say is keep trying, and you never know. Maybe the time that you don't expect anything good happen, that you meet someone that's actually keen on helping you to start your career, and then who knows, you may be discovered by a young driver program and make it through.
Yeah. No, it is tough. I would have been surprised if he said, "Oh, it's easy. You just need to."
I wish.
Okay, next question, and I do try and keep away from non-sim racing related questions, but this one caught my eye, and it's from Daniel Blanco, and he said, "What are the differences in culture between IndyCar and F1?"
Oh wow, very different. Very, very different. I think one of the first things that I was surprised with when I came in IndyCar is, let's say you have a lap one incident and the car is towed back to the garage and you're missing a wheel. Well, it happened to Iowa last month or something like that. A guy spun in front of me on lap one of the race. I tried to avoid him, hit him. So rear right suspension is destroyed. The car is brought back to the garage. They bring it to the garage. They change the car and they put it back together. And I go racing and I'm 100 laps down. So I'm like, well, what are we going to do here? Really, 100 laps down, that sucks. But also, it was just that we came racing, we go racing. It doesn't matter. We're going to learn something. We're going to go there. And it's more than a business. It's really the love of racing.
Okay, that was a beautiful answer. Mark Raddenbury asks, what's your all-time favorite livery?
Oh, good question.
He is a livery designer in the sim racing world, so whatever you say, no doubt he's going to be replicating it this weekend.
Yeah, it's good. For me, there's three that are very unique. There was the Jordan with the Benson Edge, the snake at the front. There was the camel car from Michael, 94.
Yeah.
And the Roadman's Williams.
Yeah.
That's the one
Classics.
that was winning when I start, those for me. And the McLaren 2005, the chrome one, that was beautiful. I think that's my favorite race car ever. But yeah, if I had to pick livery, I would go back to those guys. And, that's what I started watching race cars and loved it.
Yeah, I mean, say what you want about tobacco. They they gave us some great liveries.
Yeah, they did. And, I watched, since I'm 6 years old, I've watched pretty much every Formula One races. And I've grown up with watching tobacco sponsorship everywhere. I've never smoked a cigarette in my entire life. So the fact that we can have tobacco
Roman says,
sponsorship
bring it back.
money. I'm just saying, if they want to sponsor, it's not because you see it on TV that you're gonna smoke. That's just something that I personally think. But anyway, it is what it is. But they were good liveries.
Roman, thank you for your time. I've got a 60-second quick fire round, 1 or 2 word answers, and as you'd expect, they're all sim racing related. Best motorsport moment of all time?
Oh wow. The last lap in Brazil, 2007 World Championship.
Mario Kart or iRacing?
iRacing.
Why is sim racing the best?
Because it's the most real.
Why does sim racing suck?
Because sometimes it's not real.
And who should I invite to the next Sim Sundays podcast?
Thomas Ronald or Brandon Lee.
Okay. If you can make it happen, that'd be great. Right. Roman, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate you joining us on the TraxionGG podcast. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Not every day you get to interview Romain Grosjean, but we did it. Well, you did it more specifically.
It was nuts. It was very strange. It was very strange when he appeared on the webcam, and I was there in my spare room back at home, and I was like, I'm speaking to Romain Grosjean. I felt like I knew him, but no, it was great. He was very, very friendly. Obviously, he's a huge, huge sim racing fan, so it was great to see that come through. And it was really interesting when he was talking about pressure in sim racing, because obviously he's a man who knows about pressure, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And how he's had to sort of impart his lessons from motorsport to the esports team or the sim racing team, and also make the difficult decisions sometimes, but also give them his phone number so they can reach him at any time.
Yeah.
That was a really great insight that you pulled out of him there.
And we got some great questions.
Yeah, this is a good point. Yeah, thank you very much to everybody who did send in questions via the TraxionGG Discord, which you can find linked on our website. But I'm assuming there was a lot to sift through there.
There was a lot. We had tons and tons of questions. So thank you everyone who sent them in. I tried to merge a lot of them together so that we could get through as many of those questions as possible. But they were all fantastic. We tried to focus on the sim racing stuff. So if you want to get involved, go to the Discord, follow us on our social media where we pre-announce all of the guests, and you can just comment your questions underneath and get involved in all of our conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And a quick reminder, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a little comment on YouTube, maybe with some guest ideas like we mentioned at the start, and a nice review on Spotify. And
a lovely review.
Yeah, the best review you could possibly think of on iTunes.
iTunes?
I've gone back 10 years. Apple Podcasts and Spotify. There we go. Anyway, we'll be back soon with a new episode.